In a forgotten corner of the South, where time had left behind boarded windows and peeling paint, Amara Johnson drove her weathered milk truck down cracked roads. At 28, she had the kind of quiet strength that came from surviving, barely scraping by, delivering milk to homes that barely had power, where silence hung heavier than the summer heat. Every morning she followed the same route, the same houses. But one rainy morning, everything changed. As the skies wept and mud splashed against her tires, Amara pulled up to a crumbling house she had never noticed before. It stood alone, shrouded in eerie stillness. Locals called it the Forgotten House. The air around it felt wrong, like the kind of silence that hid secrets. She placed a crate of milk on the porch and knocked, out of habit more than expectation. But the door creaked open, just a sliver. A small, pale face peeked out. A boy, no older than 6, stared at her with eyes so wide, so hollow, Amara felt like she had been punched in the chest. His arms were bruised. His shirt torn. And his voice, silent. Amara recognized the look. She had once been that child. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, kneeling. "You okay?" He didn't answer. She offered him a bottle of milk and waited. But when a harsh voice roared from deep inside the house, the boy flinched so violently it made her heart stop. He slammed the door shut, and Amara stood there frozen in the rain, fists clenched. Back in her truck, she couldn't shake the image from her mind. All day, the boy's eyes followed her. That night, she didn't sleep. Days passed, but the urge to return overwhelmed her. She drove back, parked by the road, and waited. The house looked the same. Dead. But something told her it was worse now. She walked to the porch again, knocked. Nothing. Then, inside, a muffled cry. A thud. Without thinking, Amara burst through the door. A woman stood inside, wild-eyed, wielding a belt. "Get out," the woman shrieked. "No," Amara said firmly. "He's coming with me." The boy was cowering in the corner, bleeding. Amara ran to him, scooped him up in her arms, and sprinted out as the woman screamed threats behind her. Mud swallowed her shoes. Her apron was soaked. But she didn't stop running until she reached the truck. Back at her small apartment, she wrapped the boy in blankets, cleaned his wounds, and offered her name, "I'm Amara." He whispered, "Eli." "Eli," she said gently, "you're safe now." That night, Eli fell asleep on her couch. Amara sat nearby, watching over him like a hawk. The next morning, her heart heavy, Amara made the call. Authorities arrived. Polite. Cold. Efficient. As they took Eli away, he clung to her. "Will you come visit me?" She nodded, fighting back tears. "Always." Years passed. Amara never forgot him. Every time she passed that old house, her chest tightened. And every time she saw a little boy in need, she remembered Eli. Then, one spring afternoon, someone knocked on her door. It was him. Tall, confident, eyes bright with something she had never seen before, peace. "Amara," he said. She froze. "Eli?" He nodded. "You saved me. And I never forgot. I want you to be at my swearing-in ceremony." "Swearing in?" "I'm becoming a judge," he said. "Because of you." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you." At the courthouse, Amara sat in the front row as Eli stood before a sea of people and raised his hand. In his speech, he said, "There was a woman who risked everything for me. She gave me a second chance. Because of her, I found my voice." Applause thundered through the room. Amara stood, trembling, as Eli brought her to the podium. They embraced. And in that moment, the world faded. It was just Amara and Eli. The woman who saved him. And the boy who came back. After the ceremony, Amara and Eli sat on a quiet bench outside the courthouse, the spring air soft with sunlight and dogwood blossoms. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't have to. The silence between them had long ago transformed into something sacred. "I wanted to do something more," Eli said at last, watching children play across the street. "For others like me. For the ones still stuck in places like that house." Amara looked at him, taller now, but still carrying traces of the scared boy he'd once been. "You already are," she said gently. But Eli shook his head. "Not enough. I want to build something. A safe place. A home." She watched him, proud and quiet. "I'm naming it after you," he said. "The Amara Center." Amara's eyes widened. "Eli. I don't need that." "I do," he said. "Because if you hadn't knocked, I'd be nothing." Weeks turned into months. The Amara Center began as an idea scribbled on napkins and sticky notes, until Eli secured a downtown building with peeling paint and shattered windows. "Just like the town you found me in," he joked. "Only this time, we rebuild it." Amara, despite her modest life, showed up every day. She painted walls, organized books, and brought muffins for volunteers. Children began arriving, tired eyes, heavy silence, the same weight Eli once carried. And one by one, the silence lifted. There was 13-year-old Marcus, who hadn't spoken since his father was taken away. There was Ivy, who flinched every time someone raised their hand too fast. And Daniel, just 7, who clung to Amara like he had known her forever. Eli worked during the day in court and spent evenings with the kids. Amara stayed past midnight, folding laundry, wiping tears, telling bedtime stories. They weren't just saving children. They were rewriting what home meant. It was nearly a year after the Amara Center opened when the letters started arriving, official envelopes with polished seals and sterile language. First from zoning. Then from the city council. Then from the Department of Child Services. At first, Eli thought it was bureaucratic noise. But it wasn't. A developer named Colin Hartwell had plans for the block where the Amara Center stood. Luxury townhomes. Artisan cafes. He called it revitalization. Eli called it erasure. "They want to shut us down," he told Amara one night, slumped at his desk, the floor littered with legal forms. "They're calling us unlicensed. Unsafe. Unnecessary." Amara looked up from folding laundry. "But we're full. Every bed. Every meal. Every child, safe." "They don't care," Eli said, voice tight. "They only see land value." That week, a city inspector arrived without warning. He poked at fire alarms and sniffed at peeling paint. He noted down violations, some real, most exaggerated. 2 days later, they received a cease and desist notice. The children cried when Eli read it aloud. Amara didn't speak. She stood quietly, then walked out the back door and returned an hour later, with a paint roller, a hammer, and a line of neighbors behind her. Volunteers came. Parents who had once been kids themselves showed up. Local businesses brought food and supplies. Even the quietest kids, Marcus, Ivy, Daniel, helped sweep and scrub. The news caught wind of it. And then the cameras came. Amara stood before them not as a savior, but as proof. "They said we were unnecessary," she told the reporter, her voice clear. "But when no one else opened the door for these kids, we did." Eli filed an injunction. The case reached court in under a week. He stood in front of a judge who had once mentored him. "She didn't ask to be remembered," Eli said, pointing to Amara seated in the gallery. "But I'm only standing here because she did the impossible." The judge looked over the cease and desist. Then looked at Eli. "You've got your injunction," he said. "Fight it." The Amara Center stayed open. And in the weeks that followed, donations poured in. Not because people believed in nonprofits, but because they believed in one woman who once knocked on a door when no one else would. 3 years later, the Amara Center had not only survived, it had grown. The building once deemed unfit had become a symbol. A second center opened on the east side. then a third in a neighboring city. Each painted in warm colors. Each echoing with laughter. Each with a portrait of Amara at the entrance, not posed, just a candid image of her carrying a crate of milk with that familiar quiet strength. Amara didn't like the attention. "I'm not a saint," she often said. "I just opened a door." But to the children who came and lost and left whole, she was more than that. Eli's reputation grew with the center. As a judge, he handled juvenile cases with an understanding most others lacked. "Every file I read," he once told Amara, "feels like a version of me." One afternoon, a social worker walked into the Amara Center with a 6-year-old girl named Lily. She wouldn't speak. She wouldn't eat. Her eyes stayed locked to the floor. Amara didn't press. She just sat beside her. Quiet. Patient. That night, Lily cried in her sleep. Amara stayed by her side, holding her hand, humming an old song her mother used to sing. 2 weeks later, Lily whispered, "I want to stay here." "You can," Amara said, smiling. At the original center, a wall of framed photos had begun to grow. Not of Amara, not of Eli, but of the kids. The ones who had made it out. The ones who now returned to volunteer, to teach, to build. Each one a door that had been opened. Each one keeping it open for someone else. Years passed. The Amara centers multiplied, 6, then 10, then 20 across the country. They stood in cities and towns where help was often too far or too late. Each building held stories. Each room held echoes of laughter that had once been silence. Amara never stopped showing up. Even as her hair grayed and her steps slowed, she still brought snacks to group nights. Still hugged children who didn't know how to be hugged. Still sat through court hearings beside mothers learning how to try again. Then, one morning, Amara didn't open the door. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep, a warm quilt over her, the photo of young Eli still framed on her bedside table. The news spread quickly. People who had once been her kids flew in from everywhere. Grown men in suits wept at her memorial. Women brought hand-drawn cards their daughters had made for her. Judges, teachers, nurses, artists, all with the same story. She knocked. Eli stood at the front of the church, holding a copy of the first cease and desist order they'd ever received. He read it aloud, then held up the final donation ledger Amara had overseen. "The system said she was unqualified," he said. "But every child who walked through her door knew better." He paused. "I knew better." Behind him, a giant screen lit up, not with her face, but with the names of every child she had helped. Hundreds. Some clapped. Some cried. Some stood in silence, their hearts full. In the years that followed, Eli started a scholarship in Amara's name. He trained new judges in trauma-informed care. He wrote books, gave talks, and always ended with one picture: a woman in a milk-stained apron, arms full of bottles, smiling like she'd just won the world. Because, in her own way, she had. Years passed. And the Amara centers grew, 6, then 10, then 20 across the country. They rose in forgotten neighborhoods and struggling towns, in places where help was often too far or too late. Each center stood not just as a building, but as a quiet promise. Within their walls were echoes, footsteps that once crept in fear now ran in joy, voices that once whispered now laughed out loud. And Amara? She never stopped showing up. Even as her hair turned silver and her knees ached on cold mornings, she still brought muffins for the kids. Still hugged teenagers who didn't know how to ask for one. Still sat in the back row of court hearings, just in case a mother needed someone to say, "You can try again." Then, one peaceful morning, she didn't show up. They found her in bed, quilt pulled gently to her chin, a small smile on her lips, and beside her, an old photo of a frightened boy she once carried through the rain. Eli. The news spread faster than any headline. Airports filled with people no one recognized, but who all shared the same story. Judges. Nurses. Artists. Dads. Each one saying, in their own words. She knocked. At her memorial, Eli stood in front of the packed chapel. In his hands were two things: the first cease and desist letter the Amara Center had ever received, and the final donation record she signed with shaky hands just 2 weeks before. They said she was unqualified, he began. But every child who passed through her doors knew better. He looked up, voice trembling. I knew better. Behind him, a screen lit up. But it didn't show Amara's face. It showed names. Hundreds of them. The children she'd helped. The lives she'd touched. Some in the crowd clapped. Others cried. And some simply stood in silence, because their hearts were too full for anything else. In the years that followed, Eli built more. He launched a scholarship in her name. He trained a new generation of judges in trauma-informed law. He spoke to rooms of policymakers, lawyers, students, ending every talk the same way. With a photo. A woman in a faded milkman's apron, arms full of bottles. Smiling. Not because she had everything, but because she gave everything. And in doing so, she left behind a world more loving than the one she found.